I give away free Steam games with every major video I do, and here's who won this week. The games available to receive are listed below. To enter, just leave a comment and have contact information on your profile. And now, on with the video. I'm playing something almost every week, and sometimes I want to talk about it and give you a vertical slice. So stick with me for some lightning reviews. This week, on the chopping block. This week I've been playing Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. I've been finding that the last couple weeks have been good for games that I've had in my backlog and I've been very much wanting to try, with the original Half-Life and Spiritfarer serving as examples. Hellblade specifically occupied a portion of my brain ever since I got into a discussion with my friend Tyler. We were talking about games that we thought were significantly beautiful or important to experience, immediately followed by him giving me an edible that was far more powerful than I was prepared for, and I ended up passing out on a mutual friend's sofa for the next 14 hours. I was later informed that he felt guilty about that, so let me take this opportunity to respond to him and say that I think it's hilarious in hindsight and I would love to hang out again sometime. I would just recommend giving me a proper warning of dosages before I inhale whatever taste treat you put in front of me and then walk away, but I digress. Anyway, Tyler being an individual that I can respect given his professional experiences and perspective, I decided that Hellblade was something that I needed to put on my must-play bucket list, plus it came out on top of a recent community post that I made, so here we are. Hellblade follows the tale of Senua, a Norse female warrior who is established as being on a quest to save the soul of their lost lover in the opening sequence, and this introduction wonderfully establishes the tone that we're going to be immersed in for most of the runtime of your 6 to 8 hour playthrough. All the while that you're rowing, you're constantly being assailed by disembodied voices giving you countering messages or representing insidious doubts that one might experience.
There will be no more stories after this one.
What is she doing? Why is she doing this?
They're watching.
Why doesn't she know you're coming? She's doing this for him.
You see, Ninja Theory, the developers behind Hellblade, have gone on record as stating that they put a tremendous amount of effort into trying to portray mental illness in as accurate and even-handed a way as possible in order to facilitate a means of understanding for those that may not have experienced such conditions. With that in mind, I'm going to be avoiding too many spoilers because I'm treating this like other games that I think are incredibly valuable to experience for yourself. I say this to then relay that I feel like Hellblade was one of the most fascinating and engrossing experiences when it comes to exploring the character of Senua. In addition to the quest to save your lover's soul, Senua's journey also takes her through her past and illustrates all of her various struggles that she's encountered due to her state of mind and how others have interpreted her. After having seen all of it, I would say that Senua is one of the most tragic and inspiring characters that I have ever played as. Again, to say anything further I feel would be detrimental to anyone looking to experience this game, so I'm going to shift the gameplay. When it comes down to it, I found that there were two main modes that the game separates itself into. The first one being the exploration and puzzle solving phase, and the other being combat. At the start, even in just exploring the environments, it felt like Ninja Theory was punching way above its weight class as far as fidelity of the visual. I occasionally witnessed moments that might have been considered lapses in animation where the small details clipped into each other, but given the overall presentation, I can't say it affected my impressions much. And the environments aren't just there to look pretty though. Given Senua's state of mind, the environments also play vital roles in progression. One of the most common ways that this manifested was when you encountered doors that would block your forward path, but the door itself was emblazoned with runes, and if you were able to see that rune constructed from visual elements of the immediate area, then the door would unlock. Other set pieces included the necessity to find gates or other markers that you'd have to specifically navigate through or around in order to cause environmental details to manifest, such as portions of a bridge suddenly appearing when they didn't exist before until you walked through that specific archway. These elements not only mix up the exploration gameplay, but they also serve in emphasizing the reality that Senua finds herself occupying. Imagine looking for details that correlate to your environment that may not exist to other individuals. This might give you some insight to the notions of paranoia-induced hallucinations. But what about physical elements of the world that only appear after you've walked through certain gates? It may serve to illustrate the routines that those we might consider unwell and how it makes perfect sense in their mind. Even simply manipulating your perspective in order to make things come clearly into view exhibits a fascinating synchronization of gameplay, environment, and narrative. One element though that I'm of a far more mixed opinion though is combat. My first issue was the game's seeming lack of tutorialization. First combat experience was more of a fumbling to figure out the controls, and I didn't even know there was a block function until the first boss fight. That being said, once I finally did figure out the controls and mechanics of the combat, I found it rather intuitive and viscerally satisfying, at least in one-on-one fights or when facing small numbers of enemies. The combat doesn't lend itself well to large group brawls though. The way that the camera is zoomed in doesn't allow you to get a comprehensive view of the battlefield unless you back yourself into a corner. That being said, those voices that are constantly giving you the the feeling of never being alone can at least give you some warning if you're being approached from behind. Nonetheless, the occasions where I found myself being overwhelmed were few and far between, which is good because the game had one more card up its sleeve. The first time you are defeated in combat, the game straight up tells you that Senua can only fall so many times before you're given a permanent game over state. This induced a fair amount of anxiety and pause for thought on my willingness to play early on, especially when I had my first boss fight that I struggled with until I found that block function. Alright, I got this far without spoiling anything significant, but I really want to gush about this next detail. But it will absolutely hurt your experience if you are intending to play this yourself. Please, skip to the timestamp on screen in order to not be spoiled by this one detail. Commencing impassioned rant in 3, 2, 1. When Hellblade tells you that Senua can only get up so many times, and then you're greeted with the game over state if you exceed that limit and you have to start over, the game is lying to you. At first, one might question as to why they're doing it, but I feel it's a piece of genius on Ninja Theory's part to do this. In telling you this lie, it's not only giving you this erroneous perception of the world that you're finding yourself in, but it's giving you a sense of paranoia and anxiety that you would otherwise not be confronted with. It is a perfect illustration of the mental state that those with certain conditions find themselves in every moment of every day. While there are those of us that go about our lives unburdened with these insidious thoughts, there are those out there that genuinely believe that if they do not perform some specific action or carry themselves in a certain way, their existence in and of itself may cease to be. The paranoia of something seemingly inconsequential holding major consequences. It may only be a surface-level exploration of the thought processes of those who struggle, but in this exploration, it shattered perceptions of what I thought I knew and how other people see the world. Okay, I'm ceasing my rant and getting back to the substantive, non-spoilery game review now. As I was saying before, the combat is satisfying and manageable so long as you can keep a crowd to one direction or with small numbers. The only time that I ever truly found myself no longer being able to manage the combat was during one of the final boss experiences, but I expect that was entirely intentional. But the combat and the way that the enemies manifested led to another thought process. In the context of Senua's world, how much of this is even real? The game establishes very early on that she does not perceive things the same way that you or I do. Physical elements seem to manifest at will, her mood can affect the way that the environment itself appears, and the way that her perception shifts based off of her personal experiences can manipulate how we observe her surrounding. With that in mind, how much of what we observed in this game is what one would understand as, finger quotes, real? Senua fights Norse gods, seemingly comes into open conflict with elements of nature itself, and looks as though she's almost able to hop through time and dimensions in order to progress the story. But how much of this is really tangible? I mean, outside of being a video game, of course. In the narrative as it's presented, how much of this is manifesting as real, physical, measurable action, with the rest simply being vivid hallucinations or waking dreams? By some interpretations, there would be a very strong argument that the entire saga that Senua experiences could be entirely one of her own imagination as she walks along a beach. It's this room for interpretation or analysis that I find so absolutely compelling about Hellblade. While on an individual mechanical basis, Senua's sacrifice may not be doing anything all that terribly innovative or unique, but the way that they are implemented in the game's overall intention and design is blisteringly intelligent and masterfully deliberate. The way that Hellblade induced introspection and critical thinking along with being able to shift my own perspective has left what I feel is going to be a lasting impression on me. That being said, I have been also made aware that this game is set to have a sequel coming out relatively soon, and I'm left with a melancholic inquiry of how the hell Ninja Theory is going to top what they've just done. Can it be done? I hope so, but in the meantime, if this is the best that the franchise is getting, I will still have been immensely appreciative of the experience. And like with my review of Spiritfarer, I'll decline my typical outro style out of reverence for Hellblade Senua's Sacrifice.
To reassure you, make you feel safe. It only takes an instant. Fear swallows you before you have a chance to make sense of it. And darkness becomes a part of who you are.